Could we require the wind company again to do something like that? Like, in addition to the host agreement that the town agrees on, they have to provide so many, or so much toward energy compensation or whatever. Could that be done?
That could be potentially negotiated into a host or something. It's a little, one of the things that towns can't do is they can't give public funds. That's a New York State constitutional issue, and that maybe could be done in a way that avoids that. But if you're, if you're negotiating your host community agreement knowing that the town is getting less because you're shifting more over to these people, I don't think that probably gets to there, but I have, thought about it, like, is that
maybe the town
'cause there's
doesn't
probably
get
some
less,
where it
but the
does.
wind company has to pay a little more for that.
Yeah, potentially, but it's all, it's one, somebody's getting less, and.
The wind company.
Yeah, well.
I mean,
Well,
not if it's the host agreement, it's probably if the town board zoned the north side of Howard, is almost like there's a light, the light district
Like
out
a light
here.
district or something.
So if it's zoned on this side, there's no benefit there, but if it's zoned on the north side, maybe there's a tax, reduction based on being in this bad area or whatever that would be, but that would have to cover this. Because if you're talking about somebody being affected here or here, someone who might be right in the middle of it, if their paradigm or their resiliency is higher, that they might not be affected at all, that someone here might be affected an awful lot on an emotional state, and then different finances would be, so it'd be almost hard to try to pick winners and losers.
I think you almost had to have some objective criteria. That's why I said a half mile, a mile, boom, but not somebody 10 miles away necessarily. It's not gonna be affected, they may still see them, but there's a big difference between being a half mile and 10 miles.
Yeah.
But, Aaron, in this thing, obviously the wind companies know that in the future they're gonna have to deal with this. They may be willing to deal with it now. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
even though
They may.
legally they might not have to, but.
Yeah, that issue is something that the town could bring up to negotiate, to try and push the company in that direction, because that is a DPS, type program, and it's spread out to everybody in the town too. It's not, every electric pair,
Yeah.
it's not like a
Right.
selective type.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that it doesn't have to be spread out to every,
Well, the program the way that they have set up the program is.
okay, because it's public funds.
Yeah. But some of it too is, we're not just dealing with, we're dealing with other companies here too, not just the wind company.
Right.
Maybe dealing with NICEAG or RDA or, whoever, also getting them to administer it. And when DPS is behind it, DPS can drop the hammer on those companies if they don't want to deal with it. But, we can't, really, on what, we can complain to DPS or something like that, but if it's a unique program for the town and not a state type issue, then.
And we're the trendsetters.
Well, they might voluntarily do it if you ask them, but you could still zone this and zone that and zone, how big's the light district? Right here, that big? And that's it. That's the tiniest little zoning.
But like you, I guess I don't see how that
Could
incorporates
just
that
zone.
law at this point, so maybe it's a separate issue.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like view shed issues, view shed setbacks or something like that, that would require a company, a good neighbor agreement type thing, because that's what the good neighbor agreements do, is basically the people who are the most nuisance are, get paid money to waive the setbacks. And that's really why they do it. The wind companies don't do it because they're wanting to give money away. They do it because there's some sort of a setback or whatever that, where maybe they think, oh, this person might bring a nuisance suit against me or something. And so that's what they are. They become a participating landowner by waiving flicker and sound over certain levels, that kind of stuff. So, if to try and get people paid, the way to do it is to try and create some sort of setback, but like I said, that also gives, anybody who, you have to be very careful on how you would word that, because anybody within those levels can then kill off a turbine that it may not be that big of a deal to them. If they're a mile away from the turbine, it's like, okay, but if you're, the setbacks and, if you read through some of this stuff in the article fence certificates, you say, in sound, what John Sharkey, who was the main person, actually John Sharkey was the main guy that was, along with a group called Seymour, John Sharkey was basically Wendell Leese's right-hand man from the Point Inc. that had a very nice, hunting cabin over in Troopsburg, and cabin is a little bit of a pejorative term for this place, but he has fought the wind project more than anybody that I've dealt with, and he was arguing in there that these sound levels were unreasonable standards or whatever, and the expert for the state and the siting board were saying, well, there's no scientific evidence that we have reviewed that we find credible that it actually affects humans over these points, and that's why we're comfortable with these levels. And so is all of this, I don't think all of this stuff is exactly perfectly scientific on how this comes together, because but it's the setbacks that we have and the standards, they're reasonable standards that are in there for the people who are most likely to have to be nuisanced. And you're not going to be able to, if you're going to have wind turbines in the town, you're not going to be able to satisfy somebody who lives over here and really isn't affected much, but just gets mad every time they go out and look at a turbine. Even if it's reasonable, I think it's reasonable that people don't like looking at wind turbines. What they are right now, they don't bother me, but I can see why people don't like them. But there's just, I don't think there's a way to make it that everybody who's around them but not really impacted much is going to be happy that they're there if they don't like them.
One thing that's really been bothering me, and I think someone had sent it to Rhonda to distribute to us, and I don't know if it got to everybody, but it was an article or something about setbacks. And it talked about the decibel levels to a residence and those acceptable thresholds and the setbacks based on that and the height of the towers and all that. But it stated that the same criteria used for setbacks from those residences should be applied to property lines, because just as one person can argue that it's their right to do what they want on their property, that adjacent property is essentially being constrained by those lessened setbacks from a property line. Because in the future, that person could have the right to do something on their property, say subdivide, build another residence, but they're restricted from doing that at that point because of those setbacks, unless they sign a variance, or I think it was a variance that was in our former law. And to me, something just does not sit right with that. It seems like those thresholds that are meant for existing residences should also apply for property lines. I don't know how others feel about that, but it's hard for a participating person that's getting a turbine to say, hey, I can do on my property what I want to do, but their neighbor can no longer do that once these turbines are built. So I don't know from a legal standpoint what
if
the
you guys-
ramifications are. Could the
No,
town
you
be
can't-
sued for that? I mean,
No,
there's.
you can set you mean would the town be sued for not having setbacks like that?
I think the way it's currently written, it's like 2.5 times
2.2.
2.2.
Well, but the way it's currently written is 400 and 1,000.
For the current, I meant the draft.
The draft.
change.
Yeah, so the town, so anybody could sue the town for whatever, but and would somebody win for not having setbacks at property lines against the town? You're not gonna, I mean, this is not a formal legal opinion that I'm gonna be bound by, but I don't see any way that that's a winning lawsuit. If because these things are being developed all over the place with, the statewide standards aren't that. So, part of what you look at, like with town, for a negligence type comparison, if somebody had some sort of a duty to someone and they didn't fulfill that duty, which you don't even have to have a wing law. Is it a good idea to have one? Yeah, I think it's obviously a good idea to have one. But, if you said, like, most negligence type stuff is based off what an ordinary person would do, and all the statewide stuff is not based off of property lines, but some towns are based off of property lines. And, if, in this certificate, I think Canasteo has, they had a flicker or a sound from a property line. I think Prattsburg has a sound limit from a property line. That's one of the reasons why the turbines were almost all going to be in Prattsburg, and they had a couple issues. One of them is I don't think they had the landowner participation they needed in the northeast area up towards Naples in the Prattsburg project. And then the other issue was that the Prattsburg law had some very strict requirements in there. One of them was measurement at property lines. And the company said, look, if we have, I was in the supervisor meeting when Len McConnell from Prattsburg asked Kevin Sheen, why did you guys move all these turbines out of our town? And he said, you've got, for a standard at a property line, like if you have a residence or a building, that's a set thing that we can, we know where it is and we can go and measure from it. But, to go and have to measure from any point on anybody's property line anytime that there's a complaint about it or whatever, we're just not gonna do it. So they pulled it out. So, you can do that, and the level would matter probably on what the company would say, and it would be one of the things that it would be the town sort of going, according to what they did in Prattsburg, I think it would be one of the things that if you did, it would be basically telling them, we don't wanna have the project here, so.
Well, all they'd have to do where they had an issue is a good neighbor agreement with the adjoining landowner.
If the neighbor would agree
It-
on it,
it-
yeah.
Yeah, I know that, I just know what they did up in Prattsburg, and it was, maybe it was site specific on not having enough people tied up or whatever, or that they thought they would have to tie up too many people to do it, or wouldn't be able to tie those people up, but, yeah, you could, I'm sure it's some sort of economic analysis they do on all that stuff. But, it's not illegal to do it, you can do it, I can circle back and pull at Prattsburg's provision one if you guys wanna look at it and send it down. I think they just finalized their law last month maybe, I haven't seen it since it's been finalized, I just know when they were doing that was one of the big reasons why they pulled out. But
What did they do with Fremont?
Fremont was a height issue after it was certificated.
Yeah.
They ch-
Fremont agreed to 500s, and then they wanted to come in with the 650s right after that. And,
You know, Aaron, when we were talking about it, I'm going from recollection, I thought it was Judge Costello that made an opinion, because he was on the evidentiary hearings in Fremont, that towns could be held liable for good neighbor agreements, because basically these wind companies are coming in and just by virtue of having somebody sign a contract, you're waiving all your planning board, zoning, you're waiving everything, decibel levels, and if the towns didn't argue that point, I thought I read that he basically said in his opinion that towns could be held liable for that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but the towns, I mean, like I said, towns don't even have to have wind laws.
Yeah.
So I'm not, you know, I don't think you'd be, I don't think the town is gonna have any liability there. I'll have to see if I can find that. If you've got a copy of it.
I had it and I gave it away. It was just basically based on, you know, what it sounded to me was like basically by just a wind company having somebody sign a contract that the local laws don't matter anymore. I think that was the gist of where he was going with it.
That would all be documented online in
Yeah.
the matter
Yeah,
master, right?
yeah, it would, yeah.
Robin, what you were saying, it wasn't just the physical setbacks, it was the sound, the levels and all that you think
Yeah,
should
I
be.
mean, It
to
seems
a
like if
property.
it's acceptable, that's, you know, decided on at a residence, it seems like that would only be fair to someone's entire property.
I kind of think, you know, personally, I have, you know, different property or whatever, and I'm in my house every day, but I always think that I'm gonna be out, you know, on my property, and I know there's people who are out and they're learning a lot more than I am, but I think it's part of it is a recognition that you're in your house all the time, and, you know, you're not out in every part of your land all the time.
Right.
And that's just.
But I'm not talking
you could
about
put a
current build out,
Right,
I'm talking
future
about
development.
future. And I think it kind of also reflects on our current project, and if laws are changed and they decide to make those bigger too, what implications that has for neighboring properties
Mhm.
as well.
This law says that if they get taller, produce more sound, then they have to comply with the law.
That's good. Does anybody else have thoughts on the
Would-
setbacks? I mean,
Would you consider making different standards at the property line versus at a residence? I mean, it doesn't totally defeat the purpose, but it's, like you say, if somebody planned on building there, it really doesn't solve that problem. but-
right. And that's the thing, you don't know.
Yeah.
You know, to compare it in Fremont for the 500-foot towers, I believe it was 1,500 feet for 500-foot towers from a residence, and I believe it was 750 from a town, county, state road, or property line. That was the difference there.
I did bring also the 94C visual exhibit, just to get back to more of the visual stuff we're gonna look at. I don't, you know, I didn't really plan on going through it all tonight, I just wanted to, it's in this, my packet got kind of disorganized, but it was at the back of the right-hand side. Oh yeah, it looks like this. It's got these. So most of the front page is not relevant, but these are the different criteria that they look at when going through your visual study. And like I said, a lot of it is related to public types of places, but they do, you know, they do get into things like, one of the issues that's visual, it's not how we've been talking about visual tonight mostly, but it's a visual issue, is the shadow flicker. That does get into the individual, you know, into the individuals and how they mitigate that, window treatment, shutting down turbines, that kind of